I think we're all familiar with the Frankenstein story. I mean, we've all seen the Hollywood movies. We've seen the Halloween costumes and the masks. We've all known the story from a young age of a mad scientist who creates life, creates a monster who then goes on a rampage. I mean, the story is really so much more than that. There's so many things that are relevant to today's society. I mean, it's all about the dangers of knowledge, or the fallibility of science, or the sublime nature that cannot be tamed. It makes you question who is the real monster. Is it Victor, or is it his creation? It makes us question whether man can truly act as God, and and makes us question what man's role is in this world. And I mean that's the big picture of Frankenstein. It's not just the monster and the mad scientist. It's about life.
The magic of Frankenstein is that it can explore all these fundamental themes of humanity and yet present them in such a fascinating, such a riveting tale of horror and remorse. The story takes place in the late 1700s throughout Europe. It's told in various settings from Geneva to the Swiss Alps to Germany to England and Scotland. But it begins when a certain Captain Robert Walton meets Victor Frankenstein. The captain is on an expedition to the North Pole for fame and fortune in an attempt to increase the scientific knowledge. Of course, Victor Frankenstein warns against this feat, recounting his tale, and that's where we get the tale of Frankenstein. Victor was born into a well-to-do family who loved him and protected him, and he was encouraged to understand the world through science. And really, the life-changing event was when his mother died due to an illness, and he became obsessed with the idea of death. How can we prevent death? He later attended a university in Germany, and his primary concern was how do we create life. And he was quite a precocious student, and used his talents towards this end.
And that's where we first see the monster, who is commonly confused for Frankenstein. Frankenstein refers to the doctor, refers to Victor, who creates the monster in an attempt to defy death. However, Victor becomes scared of how ugly his monster is, how inhuman, how deformed and perverted his monster is, and he abandons all the while the monster is left in loneliness and despair as he seeks warmth, seeks friendship and companionship, but he never gets it. People are just fearful of his appearance, fearful of his horrible demeanor as they shun him, and I think this drives him to madness, as he commits acts of violence, acts of vengeance against his creator, because he wants to be loved, but he can't. And that adds a very human dimension to the story of Frankenstein, as it presents the conflicts that ensue between the monster and Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is written by a woman by the name of Mary Shelley, who was quite brilliant. She wrote Frankenstein when she was 18 or 19. It was published first in 1818, then again in 1831. She was the daughter of two intellectual rebels, and when she was young, the fever took her mother away. So, she's been introduced to tragedy at a very young age. And she had a very caring father who wanted what was best for her and tutored her in liberal education.
Mary Shelley, or Mary Godwin as she was born, was the second child of a feminist philosopher by the name of Mary Wollstonecraft, and the child of her father, who was a philosopher and a novelist by the name of William Godwin. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, died very shortly after Mary was born, but her father took good care of her. And by all accounts, and from letters and various documents, Mary's early years appear to be happy and prosperous. And the thing about her is that she received an unusually advanced education for a girl at her of her age and at her time. I mean, it's just her father tutored her in a very broad range of subjects. You know, he took her on educational outings. He allowed her access to his libraries. He let her read his manuscripts on Greece and Rome. He ensured that he had a daily tutor, that she was well read and well learned. And even in 1812, her father sent her to a family under the head of William Baxter in Scotland. And she admitted that it was only there that her intellectual capacity and her imagination began to truly flourish, all thanks to her father.
Mary Godwin's life probably changed forever when she first met Percy Shelley. I mean, the two immediately fell in love. It was one of those puppy dog love at first sight. Perhaps it's because she saw Percy as the embodiment of her parents' liberalism, of her parents' reformist ideals. I mean, Mary's mother was an ardent feminist who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and her father, Godwin, was a radical anarchist and a philosopher. And all this came to culmination in Percy, whom she fell in love with. However, the situation was far more complicated than that. I mean, Percy had already been married to a woman by the name of Harriet, and so their love was tragically forbidden. That didn't stop them though, so in 1814, the couple secretly ran away to France, taking Mary's stepsister, Claire, with them. Now, this really put Mary at odds with her father, who would really have nothing more to do with her. And the situation became even more complicated when Mary found out that she was pregnant with Percy's child. But Percy, whose radical economic views had put him at odds with his aristocratic family, had no means of supporting her. So, I mean, Mary gave birth to Percy's first child, and the child died soon after, and this really affected her psyche. I mean, it was, her early life was fraught with turmoil, as she was penniless, and she was ostracized by her friends and family.
It's interesting to see just how large of an influence death had on Mary Shelley's life. I mean, she could never escape death. Even when Percy and his wife Mary were traveling in Italy and Rome, her trip was ruined when she found out that her stepsister Fanny had committed suicide in 1816. And later that year in December, they found out that Percy's first wife Harriet had drowned herself in a lake in London. And moreover, she gave birth to two more children after her first, both of whom soon died short after. And for a time, Mary Shelley became depressed. Her psyche was adversely affected by all these deaths, and she could only find comfort in her writing. That is, until she gave birth to her fourth child, by the name of Percy, who finally lived through infancy and raised her spirits. But even then, the happiness was short-lived, because in 1822, Percy Shelley went on a sailing trip with a couple of friends, but tragically, the friends never reached their destination as they drowned in the ocean. And Mary, when she found out about this, soon plunged into depression once more. After her husband died, she busied herself by editing her husband's poems. She wanted to immortalize him. She resolved to live by her pen and for her son, even despite her shaky financial situation. She transcribed many poems for people like Lord Byron and other well-known intellectuals. She basically threw herself into literature. It's also interesting to note that her father-in-law, Sir Timothy Shelley, had agreed to support his grandson Percy and support Mary if Mary just handed custody over to Timothy. But Mary instantly rejected this idea, as she wanted to be the one to raise Percy herself. It was also around this time in the early 1800s that she started working on her novel, The Apocalyptic Last Man, and she also wrote a series of memoirs commemorating Lord Byron and Percy Shelley. She met American actors such as John Payne and Washington Irving, and throughout the early 1820s and 1830s, she championed Percy Shelley poetry and promoted it and quoted it in her writing. And really, it was only because of her that her husband's works became well known and admired. I mean, she lived the rest of her life for literature and arts and liberal ideals. Times did pick up in 1848 when her son Percy Florence married Jane. And the marriage was happy, and Mary and Jane got along, and so Mary decided to live with her son and daughter-in-law in London, and that's where she spent the rest of her life.